to see people sharing testimonies in the church. I love it. I love it because God has been so good to us. He has been. So it's good to hear people sharing the good news of what he's doing. So good. Well, good morning. Good morning. It is good to see you all here this morning. I'm hoping that you've all had a pretty good week. It was a little drier this week. I say that going into tonight. We'll kind of be back into the weather again. But it is good to see you here this morning. I hope you've had a good week. I know that for some, this week has felt like it's just been here and then gone. Now there's a few others that I've talked to that have said, well, this week felt like it drug on for 3 months. But it didn't. I always enjoy hearing bits and pieces of everybody's week on a Sunday morning. Everybody's been through some things throughout their week. Some of us this morning have said that, you know what, I had a really busy week of work this week. Work was crazy. And then there's others who have extremely active kids and teenagers, and they'll say, well, I've been to this practice and that practice and this game, running the kids around to all their events. Some of us have just been dealing with the challenges that have been thrown at us, things that come from just life. I would say that for myself, I had the normal rhythms of life this week. There were meetings. There was class this week. I'm taking a class through the denomination. That was this week. There was preparation. There's preparing messages like this one, for example. There were times of going and visiting people. The usual things that happen in pastoral ministry. Now, I do want to say this without oversharing anyone's stories. We heard a little bit from Brian earlier. This week had some exceptionally difficult moments. Exceptionally difficult moments. But wrapped in that, there were also moments of unbelievable joy. Unbelievable joy. This week, we saw 2 people give their life to Christ. 2 people. It's great. It's great. 2 people stepped from a life of darkness into a life with Christ. And the thing is we should clap. We should celebrate for that. The Bible tells us that all of heaven rejoices when even one sinner repents. And so there were 2. And so I tell you, there was a party in heaven this week. And it's worthy of us celebrating here as well. But as I was thinking about those things, I was going through this message, I found myself thinking on something that I find that a lot of people, when they first come to a relationship with Christ, they do have a lot of questions. And one of the questions that inevitably comes up when people are getting saved for the first time, they'll ask you, what difference should following Christ actually make in my life? What difference does it make? They don't just ask, what am I supposed to believe? What sort of things am I supposed to do and what am I supposed to not do? They don't just ask, which church am I supposed to go to? Because even new believers instinctively know and understand something important. If someone claims to follow Jesus for years, but their life looks exactly the same as it did before, something don't add up. And even people who are not believers yet, they notice this as well. They see Christians whose lives look no different than the rest of the world, and they ask themselves that question: why in the world do I need to become a follower of Jesus if my life and their life already look exactly the same? It's a fair question. Following a king always shapes the people who live under his rule. I want to give you an example of this. If you were to up and move to another country, for example, you've just decided, you know what, I want to move to, I don't know, pick a place. Iran. All right. What a time for that one, huh? But if you were to move to a new country, at some point you begin to adapt to the culture you live in. You eventually begin doing things in life the way the people there do them. You eventually have to learn to like new foods because your favorite food here is probably not even available there. You eventually begin to have to learn and understand the language if you want to be able to get around and to do certain things. And why do people do all these things? Because living under a different authority eventually produces a different way of life. It just does. The same is true of someone who begins following Jesus. Now, over the last couple weeks, I feel like Jesus has already challenged us in some foundational ways. The first thing that we looked at was that we are called to deny ourselves. This is a shift in authority. Who has control of our lives? Is it me or is it him? The next thing that he told us was that we are called to take up our cross daily and follow him, which is a shift in our allegiance. But if Jesus truly becomes our king, something else must happen. You see, a different king doesn't only change the things that we believe, but also reshapes who we are as a person. So that's exactly what Jesus discusses in a message that we often know as the Sermon on the Mount. Have you heard it? Good. Now, if I'm being honest, this is something that I too have had to wrestle with in my own life. I have. Because following Jesus, it sounds inspiring when we first hear it. It sounds like something exciting and something that would give us purpose and something that gives us meaning to our life. But the moment that Jesus begins asking for things that challenge our plans, things that push against the things that we naturally want, suddenly, following doesn't feel quite so easy. I've noticed something about my own heart over the years, and that's I don't mind following Jesus as long as the road ahead looks pretty reasonable. You know? As long as it makes sense to me. As long as it seems like it's something that I can manage okay. I hear it. I hear him. And I've often shared, even with the teens, about this. as long as God doesn't require more sacrifice from me than I was expecting, it seems pretty easy. I've told them, and we've talked before, you guys all are aware of our story. In fact, Bree sent me a text message yesterday. She said, today marks 6 years since you and Hope moved to Terre, Haute. 6 years. I know. But if I'm being honest, that was sort of my heart just over 6 years ago. Because I'd been going into ministry and I'd been doing children's ministry part-time, but then when I got the call and God was calling me to go, that included some extras. That included giving up my job of 17 years that I thought I was going to retire from. That included giving up half my salary. We've talked about that. And in that moment, I have to sit there and think to myself, this doesn't seem reasonable. My brain says, but wouldn't it be easier to keep this good job you've had all these years, stay in the same town you've lived in your whole life? But that's not what God was calling us to do. And so I have to ask myself something simple. Am I truly following Jesus, or am I only following when it's comfortable and it fits into my plans? Well, thank goodness we went that route, because God has been faithful the last 6 years to her and I. I don't even know what we did with all the extra money. I don't know where that went to. It's one thing to admire Jesus. It's one thing to agree with Jesus about the things he says in Scripture. But the call of Jesus has always been deeper than that. The call of Jesus has always been to follow his lead, to follow his example, even in the times that it doesn't make sense to us. Woo-wee. He's got it figured out, y'all. He's got it figured out. Most of us typically think about Christianity in terms of behavior. We assume that following Jesus mostly means you've got to do this and this and this, but don't do this and this and this. Avoid this, but do this. Stay away from certain habits. Stay away from certain sins. Now here's the thing, obedience certainly does matter, but Jesus is doing something far greater in our lives than behavior management. He's forming a people. He's shaping hearts. Completely producing a different kind of character in those that live under his reign. Now, the problem is the culture around us is also trying to form a people in the opposite direction. The world and the kingdom, they celebrate very different things. The world around us celebrates pride, but the kingdom honors humility. The world celebrates dominance, but the kingdom celebrates meekness. The world is in pursuit of self and comfort, but the kingdom hungers for righteousness. The world, it loves a good outrage, right? Something to be fired up about and mad about. and protest about, throw a fit about. But the kingdom produces mercy. Which means if Jesus truly is king, his rule will inevitably produce something different in the lives of his people. And that's exactly what Jesus begins to describe as we take a look in Matthew chapter 5. We're going to Matthew chapter 5, and Matthew tells us that when Jesus saw the crowds of people, it tells us that he went up onto a mountainside, okay? And then his disciples, they joined him, and he sat down and he began to teach them. Now, he wasn't there just to have a casual conversation with them. He wasn't offering inspirational advice. Rather, he was beginning to describe what life looks like in his kingdom. And so before Jesus ever gives a single command, he starts with identity. And he begins each one with these words. He says, blessed are. Blessed are. Now that word blessed doesn't mean if you're lucky, this is what you'll look like. Doesn't mean anything about our comfort. What it means is these are the things that are approved by God. This is what flourishing in the kingdom looks like. This is how we live rightly in his reign. So, Matthew 5, 1 through 12, here's what it says. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and he sat down. His disciples came to him and he began teaching them. He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now we often call these the Beatitudes, right? The Beatitudes. Now they're not just 8 random ideas that Jesus had in this moment, and so he decided to say them. They're a portrait of the kind of person that Jesus is forming. They show us what life looks like when Jesus is king. So he began by saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom does not begin with our strength. Rather, it begins with humility, which is quite different than what the world around us would teach us. To be poor in spirit is to recognize our spiritual need. It's to recognize our spiritual need. It's admitting that you cannot fix yourself. It's admitting that you cannot justify yourself. You can't save yourself. The kingdom belongs to those who know they need a king. Then Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. This is not a vague sadness. This is those who grieve over sin in the world. grief over our own sin, grief over the brokenness of the world that we live in. We live in a culture that so quickly numbs discomfort and guilt, wants to get moving on to the next thing. But Jesus says the people who flourish in the kingdom are those whose hearts are aligned with God. Then Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Now, meekness is not the same thing as weakness. I'm a poet and didn't know it. Meekness is not weakness. It's strength under control. Oh, we live in a time when the world will celebrate dominance and aggression. But the kingdom belongs who trust that justice is not ours. Justice belongs to the King. We allow him to take care of those things. Then he says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." I find it interesting that he uses the terms hunger and thirst. You ever been hungry before? You ever been thirsty? This isn't just a mild interest in righteousness. It's not being casually curious about righteousness. It's a hunger for it. It's a thirst for it. It's a deep longing for the righteousness of God. And then he says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." Mercy absorbs wrongdoing without retaliation. But for those who have received mercy, it's awful hard not to give it to others. The cross itself was mercy extended to God's enemies. Our sin places us at odds with God. And so at one point we were enemies of God. But Jesus extended mercy to us. Then he says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." Now, this purity of heart is not the idea of putting on one mask in certain situations and then taking off the mask in other situations. It's not about public performance. It's about wholehearted devotion to the King. Then he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." Peacemakers are those who pursue restoration, who want nothing more than to see relationships mended. They move towards reconciliation rather than division. And then finally he says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness." Now, why in the world would that be the final one that he says? Blessed are those who are persecuted? Because the truth of what Jesus is describing is if you live this way, the world is not always going to celebrate you. It's not always going to agree with you. The values of the kingdom stand in contrast to the values of the world. But we need to remember that if at some point, when persecution does come, persecution does not mean failure. It doesn't. It confirms our allegiance to him above all else. Now here, Jesus, he's not giving us 8 separate commands that we need to follow. He's describing the character of those who live under his reign. This is what we are to look like. This is what formation looks like when Jesus is the king. And here's the wonderful truth of the gospel. Ready for this? Jesus does not merely sit down and teach the Beatitudes. He embodies them. He is humble. He mourns over sin. He is meek before his accusers. He hungers for righteousness. He extended us mercy from the cross. He makes peace through his sacrifice. The king lives the kingdom. And the great news is that he invites us to follow him into it. So the question that this passage forces us to ask ourselves is not simply, do we agree with what he's saying here? Because whether we agree or not is true. The real question is this the kind of life that's being formed in me? And it's something that we must each ask of ourselves. I can ask myself that and know the answer, but it's a question that each of us must ask of ourselves. Truth is, following Jesus is not merely about believing the right things. It's about allowing him to change us into a different kind of person. More humble. Lord, make me more merciful. More hungry for righteousness. If Jesus is truly our King, he will begin to reshape our character. Now, for some of us, that may not happen instantly, overnight. Some of us, that might be a more steady journey to get there. But I want to ask you this. Could you imagine what would happen if a community of people truly lived this way? Can you imagine what would happen? A people who are marked by humility and who are quick to extend mercy, who are hungry for righteousness, people committed to peace. In a world that's defined by pride and outrage and division of people, and you're on this side or this side, this kind of community, it would stand out. It would stand out. Not because it's louder and more aggressive, but because it reflects the very character of the King. Following him is not only about where we're going one day, but it's also about who he is forming in us now. Under a different king, a different kind of life begins to take shape. And so this morning, as we come to the end of the passage, I want to invite the worship team to join us back on the stage. The worship team, we're going to do one final song of worship and of praise together. But I also want them to lead us in a moment of reflection, because this has asked us some pretty serious questions about ourselves and our own lives. What Jesus describes here in the Beatitudes is not simply a list of virtues that we're supposed to admire. It's a picture of a life that begins to grow in the life of people who follow him as the king of their lives, as Lord of their lives. So again, is this the kind of life that's being formed in me? Is humility growing in me? Is mercy shaping the way that I treat other people? Is my heart becoming more aligned with the heart of God? Because following Jesus is not just about going to church on Sunday morning or agreeing with certain beliefs. Oh, I agree with this, I agree with this. It's about becoming the kind of person that he has described here, that he wants to form us into being. And for some of us this morning, as we take a look honestly at our lives, we may realize some things about ourselves. Maybe this type of life is not being produced in us yet. Maybe there would be some here today who would say, you know what? I've never surrendered my life to the King. Maybe today you've heard about this kind of life that Jesus produces and you find yourself thinking, that's the life that I want. So if that's you this morning, if that would be someone, you can receive Christ today. You can surrender your life to him, and he will begin that transforming work. Now, for others of us, we may have been following Jesus for years. And maybe our heart has drifted. Maybe we've allowed the world to do more of the shaping of our attitudes than the kingdom. Maybe our pride has crept in where humility is supposed to be. Or maybe anger has replaced mercy. And today the Holy Spirit would gently be calling us back to following. And then maybe there's others who just desire a deeper level of transformation. Maybe you would say, well, I love Jesus, but I want my life to reflect his character more and more. More and more. So you could ask God to do a deeper work in your life, to shape you, to refine you, to sanctify you, set you apart for his purposes completely. But here's the beautiful thing about church. We don't have to respond to this alone. So maybe you would say you're one of those and you would like to come this morning to the altar for prayer. You can come and seek God's heart for your life on your own. Or if you'd like for someone to pray with you, you can do that too. But whatever the reason, as we sing this last song, may we reflect on our own lives. And if we want to come forward, please do. Just remember that under a different king, a different kind of life begins to take shape. So as we sing this last song, may we worship together and seek his will for us each.